De mare.
Hello, and welcome all of our guests here at Africa Week 2020. It has been an amazing week, and we still have more. I'm so excited to introduce you all into this panel. It is called Black Boomers. It was not that long ago. This panel discussion was inspired by a conversation I had with my mom, who I will introduce, about some of the stories that of her experiences of living here in the United States. Some of the stories I'd heard little bits and pieces of, some of the stories that were brand new to me. And I was like, whoa, this is part of what's missing in this sort of current revolution that's happening, this Black Lives Movement or Black Lives Matter, this building of the new world, this all of our realizations and all of our willing to acknowledge all of the truths that get covered up in our culture and society. And so I've brought all of these lovely boomers here together today to talk about some of the interactions, some of the conflicts, some of the ways they may have been involved in small or big protest in that time. We're also going to talk a little bit about school integration and if anybody's willing, possibly interactions with police. I'm really excited to share this because I feel like as we create this new world and as we are, some of us feel like we're in a fight, I think it's important to just understand what happened before. What's the wisdom from what happened before? What can we also use that was working from before? And yeah, so I'll leave it there. So today we have with us Reginald Liggins. We have Penny Gamble Williams. We have Robert Wendell Roston. And we also have my mom, Cathy Lewis. So I'll ask each panelist, we'll go around and ask each panelist to tell us where you grew up and one word that describes the United States from your youth. You can just jump in, whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
Hey, my name is Robert Roston, and I grew up in a small town in South Carolina called Spartanburg. I grew up in a neighborhood. It was a segregated neighborhood that was called Back of the College. It was really totally segregated. There was only Black residents in that neighborhood. One word that describes the United States when I grew up, I would say, is unequal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, unequal.
Okay, I had a similar experience. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. My name is Reginald Liggins. I go by Reggie. And like Robert, my neighborhood was totally segregated as well. And I guess if I had one word to describe the U.S., I would say violent.
What?
Violent. There were a lot of assassinations, especially racially motivated assassinations.
Thank you.
I'll go next. My name is Cathy Lewis, and I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. My neighborhood, well, the residential part of the neighborhood was Black neighborhood as well. There was a few white businesses in there, like the closest grocery store, and a couple of other businesses. if I had to describe growing up, I would say frustrating. You want a lot of words? I can give you a lot of words, but you said one.
Right.
I'm Penny Gamble Williams. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. The neighborhood where I was raised was an interesting one because it was somewhat multicultural in a sense. I grew up on the east side because in Providence it was, had these divisions. There was the east side, north side, south side, and west side.
Mm-hmm.
And so I lived on the east side, and we had a lot of people who hadn't totally moved away. So we had Jewish, we had Armenian, we had people from the Cape Verde Islands, and African Americans, and people who were from the different tribal nations, some Wampanoag, like in my family,
Mm-hmm.
and Narragansetts, and some people who had come down from Maine, Passamaquoddy people. So it was kind of an interesting, we all knew each other. And my mother had grown up with some of the Jewish kids, and some of their parents still remained in the neighborhood. And then eventually they all moved out. I would call growing up in Providence complicated.
Complicated.
That's how I felt that the U.S. was complicated, because there was racism in Rhode Island, but it was kind of, that hidden racism. It was there, but nobody wanted to talk about it.
Interesting. Well, that actually leads me into my next question, was what is, for all of you or whoever wants to answer, when do you remember the first time that you sort of consciously, let me welcome somebody else in. Hi, Rabiah. Welcome. I'm so glad you made it.
I just sent Wapajea the link. He should be on shortly.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. This is good. So welcome, Rabiah Nur. We were just introducing ourselves by saying where we grew up, where you grew up, and saying one word that describes the United States from your youth.
Looks like she's frozen.
Is she frozen for a moment?
Yeah, she's frozen.
Okay. She looks strong in that picture, eh?
It's just frozen.
So we'll move on. Maybe we'll come back when when she comes back. My question is, when is the first time that you sort of became conscious that there's racism?
Okay, I can start with that one. I first became conscious with racism when I was about 8 years old. I was going on a hike with my uncle's Boy Scout and Cub Scout troop. My uncle was a Boy Scout leader, and we were hiking through a white neighborhood, which was a lower class white neighborhood in an area that was called Drayton, which was connected with a cotton textile mill. And as we were going through that neighborhood, we got approached by a mob of white teenagers, boys, and they began shouting and calling us niggers and telling us to get out of their neighborhood. And they began throwing rocks and sticks, and so we just took off running. And my uncle, who was a full adult, he was a history teacher, he led us. He ran too. We were all afraid. We were all afraid, and so we were able to narrowly escape from that attack.
And how old were you?
I was 8 years old. That made me aware of racism, conscious of racism.
So you were like with an adult, like someone who's to protect you, and the person who sort of makes the decisions for the group, and even he was like, run.
Yeah, that's exactly what he was doing, because he was aware of how dangerous that could be, and that he really didn't have control because he could have been harmed or killed.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was aware of racism as a small child because my father was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, and he was professionally a musician who had been in many jazz bands and had traveled. He was also in the Navy.
Yeah.
And so, you know, he ended up in Rhode Island as a Navy man, and then continued his career, met my mother, and settled in Providence. And I remember different conversations with my father and other musicians, you know, who were in big bands like Louis Armstrong band and Duke Ellington bands. And whenever they would perform in Rhode Island, they'd always come to our house, some of the musicians, for a meal. And as a little kid, I started, you know, hearing, you know, them talking about, yeah, you know, we couldn't stay at that hotel. And so many times they stayed in places where it was safe. Like in Chicago, they knew the people who would, you know, put them up, give them food. And it was always in the Black community. The same thing, you know, anywhere they went, New Orleans, Texas,
Greenbook.
they knew they were safe. And they would get a good meal and they would, you know, see friends. But yet they would be performing in these different venues where a lot of white people were. So my father made it very clear, you know, about what the real deal was. And that's what made it complicated for me, in a sense. You know, because you see one thing, you know, people are kind of nice to you.
Yes.
And then my mother was, I think a lot of it was survival because she had got an education. She went to the Rhode Island School of Design and then did some of her graduate work at Howard. And so that's when she really felt that sting of racism when she went to North Carolina with her roommates. And she always talks about this. She wanted to get a drink of water and she went over to the water fountain that was for whites only. And her friend, who became my godmother, said, Adele, don't go over there. And so my mother, that was like a big wake-up call for her. She always talked about that. And so
I just can't even imagine living in a time where you would see anything with that on it.
Yeah.
So all of you saw those labels?
Yeah, I saw them.
Yes.
Our
that was normal. That was normal. That was our normality.
That's true.
Yeah. Anybody who is in our audience right now, if you can imagine seeing this written on any door or any water fountain or any facility, please say so in the comments. My Lord.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of it myself again because I was in a very segregated area.
Yeah.
My experience when I was about, I think it was around 6 or 7, I went to what they call the Mid-South Fair, you know, where you ride the roller coaster and all this stuff. And I remember going to get a corn dog, and as I was turning to leave the stand, this white guy came and just stood on my foot and was just kind of leering at me. I mean, smiling, but a real evil type of smile. And it maybe lasted 30 seconds or a minute, but
yeah.
I think he just wanted to just scare me for some reason.
Yeah.
And and of course, you know, as soon as he got off, I just ran away. And I didn't say anything to my dad, anything about that, but because I know my dad would probably want to find him and fight him, but that was kind of my first encounter.
So it was just senseless brutality.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because the person could.
Yeah, just because he's bigger and you know, yeah, felt like he had the power.
Wow. Okay. Mom, go ahead. We'll welcome in Wapajea after my mom goes.
Okay. So my first realization of racism was fairly young. My dad took the car to work, so we rode the bus. We had to go anywhere during the day. I remember going on shopping trips with my mom, and I wanted to sit in front of the bus. You can't sit there, dear. Why? Because, this is for white people. We have to sit in the back. Why? I let it go a couple of times, but I imagine I must have been no more than 5. Well, why? I can see better from the front. I can see better because all these adults, I wanted to sit in the first seat where I could see out of the window like the driver, right? Mm-hmm. And no, Black people have to sit, we're colored at the time. Colored people have to sit in the back of the bus. And like Penny said, you have the water fountains, the bathrooms, even sometimes a restaurant you couldn't enter, but they would serve you at a window in the back.
I want to add something real quick while you're talking about that, Cathy. For years in Providence, you could shop in a store, but you could not try on any clothes.
Especially not a hat.
No hats?
No hats. Clothes. You could buy something, you could probably return it, but you couldn't try it on in the store. They didn't want you in their rooms. They didn't want your greasy hair in their hats.
Teach.
But you could spend your money there.
Yeah.
And that was our normal.
My grandmother she was born in 1890, okay? And she grew up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And, that was just the norm. And, when she moved to Providence, so she knew what her size was, and she would just go pick things out and just deal with it. And she sewed. So if it didn't fit right, she'd alter it herself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember as a kid going in a store that was in the downtown area of my city, which is Spartanburg, South Carolina. And the store was called Cress's. And it was kind of like a department store. And I remember distinctly that, you said you can look at things, you can look at clothing, but you can't try it on in here.
Right.
Wow. So let's just review real quick for those people who might be like, I'm just realizing some people might not know what boomers are because we do have an international audience. Boomers is, I don't want to reveal everybody's ages, but basically all of you were kids in like the 50s and the 60s, right?
That's right.
So we're talking about sort of that 50 to 60s era. They were all old enough to be conscious of what was going on around them. I want to, before we introduce Wapajea, thank you for coming to be with us. I just want to say my co-creatrix of Africa Week 2020 is watching, Dima Mahmoud, and she must have just heard my mom talking because she just said, I now know why "why" is one of Alexandra's most important words. As any teacher, colleague, co-creator, collaborator, or student of mine knows, why is going to come out of my mouth at least 20 times in.
At least 20.
At least. Wapajea, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time hearing you all. Like, it's breaking up some. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Wapajea, could I ask you, where did you grow up and what was the first time that you were consciously aware of racism?
I grew up in Chicago.
Chi-town.
And I have to say the first time I was consciously aware of racism is when I went to visit my grandmother in Arkansas. Because I grew up in segregation. You always saying, we are children in the 50s and 60s, but I was born in 1949. So my whole childhood was, basically all of the 50s and then the 60s. And Chicago's a very segregated place, period.
True.
When I was a child, everybody lived separately. So I didn't think anything of it. I did not have any interactions with Anglo-Saxons until I got out of high school. Everybody in my environment looked like me, wanted the best for me, looked out for me. When I got out of high school, that's when I went into the world of Saxons, and I was horrified, not just as their behavior toward me, but their behavior toward each other. But when I had to go every summer to my grandmother's house in Arkansas, in Little Rock, because my mother said if I stayed in Chicago during the summer, I'd become too northern.
Huh.
Too northern.
And she said that women are the carriers of the culture, so I can't be wasting my time in Chicago. Well, I could be down south learning. So when I went to my grandmother's house was really the first time I remember having to not be able to try on anything in the store. Because we didn't leave our neighborhood too much. And Chicago people, in Chicago, they have whole stripping malls that are black. They have movie theaters that are black. They have all their own black stuff. Mahalia Jackson said when she first came to Chicago, she felt like she was in black heaven.
Lord have mercy.
Yeah, but in Arkansas, that's the first time, I was faced with the lunch counter issue, the try on clothes issue. And my grandmother was a licensed masseuse in the state of Arkansas, and she was a hairdresser. So she went to take care of clients, and these Anglo-Saxons told her, be sure you don't massage any Native or Black people.
Whoa.
They didn't want her touching them.
Okay, she didn't pay them any mind. She got her money and came on back home. So yeah, I saw it way more in Arkansas than I saw in Chicago. I saw it in Chicago after I got out of high school when I started to interact with Saxons. That's when I saw their behavior.
Wapajea. This is the first time that I've heard someone naturally and continuously refer to white people as Anglo-Saxons and Saxons.
I love it.
This is, I find this so amusing because I've heard the word, but I just have never heard anybody
use it in common usage.
That's their tribe. They're calling themselves Caucasians. But Caucasians are Russians who came from the Caucasus Mountains. They're not Caucasians. They are Saxons.
Come on.
Okay. So I have to ask everybody, did you call white people white people? Did you call white people people? How did you refer to white people?
White people.
White people?
Pretty much.
Yeah, white people, but down in the South, we also negatively refer to them as crackers.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. That's what my dad would say when he would get really upset about stuff he was seeing during the riots. And he would get very animated and passionate. It was like all these things would come back in his mind, and he would go like this. He would look at me and say, you see what's happening out there? And I would just be looking like, oh my gosh. My father wouldn't hold his tongue for anybody.
We also use honky a lot.
Yeah, that was one of the terms. Honky was one.
Yeah.
One of our guests is saying, my mother was born in 1946, told us stories of her childhood when there were segregated parts of Norfolk, Virginia. As a child in the late 60s, segregation was more subtle. We walked everywhere or got rides from friends. We never rode the bus. Downtown, there was a black shopping mall and a white mall. Even when I was a young adult in the 80s, amenities were disparate, like water fountains in the daytime. So let's talk about segregated neighborhoods, because, for example, like when I go to Denver, I think of Denver as segregated, and that's because I used to do a children's show. We go all these schools everywhere, and some schools would be completely black and there'd be like a white kid or maybe a Latino kid, and then we go to schools that were all Latino, and then there's schools that were all white, and there might be one or two people that look different. And so that's but I also know that in those neighborhoods, people sort of mix in those neighborhoods. So when you all are talking about, I lived in a segregated neighborhood, what do you mean?
So I grew up in what was called South Memphis, and there was like a whole swath. I mean, with I don't know how many, maybe hundreds of neighborhoods in it, but it was all black. South Memphis was like all black. And kind of like she was saying in Chicago, we just did not encounter white people, and until I was in middle school and got bused. So, but yeah, for the most part, we didn't encounter them unless we were at the fair or, just doing something totally out of the ordinary. But yeah, it wasn't just a neighborhood. It was just a whole section of the city.
So so the generations before you as well had really mostly had interactions with Black people.
Yeah, limited. I mean, as a kid, I mean, as for adults going to work, and I don't know what they encountered, obviously, because I wasn't with them. But
yeah,
it's part of the city I grew up in was just totally Black.
Mom, was that
there were a couple of Asian grocery stores in the neighborhoods, but that was about it.
Yeah, in my neighborhood there was one white grocer, and my grandmother was actually an owner of a convenience store that was in the neighborhood, and there would be the whites coming and doing business, like the Lay's potato chip man would come and deliver the potato chips, and the beer man, whether it was Budweiser or Pabst Blue Ribbon. You guys don't know nothing about that.
Blue Jewel, I know Blue Jewel.
Yeah, and deliver stuff, but it was really a Black neighborhood. It was called back at the college. It was so Black that there was actually a Black kindergarten in the neighborhood, which I went to and graduated from. Yeah, there were Black churches there. There was a Black elementary school. It was just pretty. It was really Black. I mean, and that was the contact with other racial groups, and really no other racial groups other than white people or Anglo-Saxons came, and that was very minimal.
Mom, when you were growing up, it was New Orleans. I feel like it was more mixed.
A little, in some ways, there were Black neighborhoods, but it wasn't just like this side of the city is white and this side of the city. And almost every part of the city, you had a mixture of people, even though there was like the Irish Channel and the section where a lot of Italian people live. It's hard to describe. New Orleans is kind of built in, if you take a big block of 4 major streets in the early days of New Orleans, you had the big mansions and everything on these big avenues, right? And they might be like 10 blocks apart and make a big square. But then the next block in would live the merchant class. And these are how a lot of the neighborhoods would develop. The next block in behind the mansions, that next block around, say at block A, lived the merchant class. And then the next block in, behind that, still within that big square, lived the servant class. So it was like that was how the neighborhoods developed, these big, huge residences, and then all their support group. Because while the French Quarter was developing uptown, where all those mansions and stuff are, that was the American Quarter, what's now called the Garden District. That's where all the Americans lived, which was separate from the French people that were in, say, the downtown area. And then you had the Carrollton area, which was a totally different city, which is now part of New Orleans. And they sort of developed the same way. So you had these pockets of Black neighborhoods all over, and then for schools, yes, the schools were segregated. I remember the first school I went to was 2 blocks from my house. It was a Black elementary school. There was a white school, elementary school, just a few blocks away. I can't tell you where those people live. I knew where the school was, but, I lived in a neighborhood that was primarily Black. We had a white grocery store here, 2 blocks away. It might have been another white business. I probably had to go about 6 or 7 blocks before I was into a neighborhood where you would encounter white people. But I don't recall there being like a lot of Black-owned restaurants or a lot of, maybe 1 or 2 businesses, but not a lot of businesses. So we did encounter people on a daily basis. But yeah, and then things just sort of changing fairly quickly by the time I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
My brother was 5 years older than me, and he never would have gone to a desegregated school. And he's a boomer as well. He was 47. I was 52. And 1948, 1952. And he never would have gone to a segregated school. There's 11 years difference between my older brother and my youngest sister. And I was talking to them, there's a big difference in our school experience and the schools we had the chance to go to. In New Orleans, when I was growing up, I would say about 60% of the schools were private schools. And when I say private schools, out of that 60%, I would say 50% were probably Catholic schools. And there were Black Catholic schools and there were white Catholic schools from K through high school. So those were private schools, but there were also private schools that were sort of the elite type of schools. The Catholic schools weren't anything elite or anything. It was just a religious education along with your education. Those didn't integrate until I was starting high school. And then they got even more private schools because some people didn't want their kids in integrated schools. So they formed their own private elite schools.
Wow.
Yeah.
Growing up in Providence, it's kind of interesting because you had, like, on the north side of Providence, you had the Irish, and then the Italians had their own district. Mm-hmm. And then the south side, it became mostly in African-American communities. On the east side, we were close to, like, a lot of the manufacturing companies. So there was this North Main Street, and you had, different factories and stuff along this corridor. So it was an interesting place. So a lot of people would come from North Providence to work there. And then the neighborhood where I lived, it was kind of the end of a lot of like Jewish people and Armenians who lived in that particular neighborhood, and some of the Irish. So they had moved out. And so you had predominantly, like I said, a community of African Americans and a lot of the native people that came up from southern Rhode Island, the Narragansett, work, and the Wampanoags who came up from Massachusetts to work, and, like I said, some from Maine who came down, to be able to make a living.
Yeah.
And then there was the lower part of another part of the east side where Brown University is located. Once you moved past the university area, then you had the area where the Cape Verdeans and the Portuguese came. The former whalers and stevedores and merchant marines who lived along by the water, because Rhode Island has a lot of waterways and rivers and stuff. So it made for kind of an interesting, somewhat segregated communities.
Yeah.
The Cape Verdeans stayed along that area, the Lower East Side. And then we all ended up at the same schools eventually. But it, like I said, very complicated in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like a lot of you experienced all Black schools, and at some point either were brought over, it sounds like Black people were brought into the white schools, not white people being brought to the Black schools, correct?
Yeah, when I was in the 8th grade, I got bused to a white school.
So was it like a lottery? They were just like you, and you?
They divided up my neighborhood, and literally one side of my street in east, they kept going to the Black middle school, and then the people on my side and west got bused to the white school called Wooddale. Really, what I found interesting about it is even when I went to white school and I was there with them day after day, I can honestly say I did not have any white friends in that school. Even though we were there, we still stayed separated. And I could not name one white person that I went to school with. I mean,
I was also bused to school, to an elementary school, which was not in a Black neighborhood. It was about 3 or 4 miles from my neighborhood. and that was in 1968, which was about 15 years after Brown versus the Board of Education. So my city and my state refused to comply with the Supreme Court decision for almost 15 years. But yes, I was bused to that elementary school. It's called Chapman Elementary, and also bused to the junior high school after I graduated from the elementary school in 1970. And that school was called Cleveland, which was also about maybe 5 or 6 miles from my neighborhood.
I'd like to welcome in Rabiah Nur. Welcome, Rabiah.
Thank you.
Hi, will you let us know, where did you grow up, and what was sort of your when you first consciously experienced racism?
Wow. I grew up in Los Angeles, California.
We have the West now.
LA.
Yeah, LA is in the house.
Hollywood.
Yes. Well, I was raised in Los Angeles until I was 14, and then we moved to the San Fernando Valley. My experience of racism, it varied because I grew up in a very mixed neighborhood. There were African Americans, there were white folks, there were Japanese, there were Chinese, Mexicans. Within 3 or 4 blocks, we had everybody living on our street, Armenians. And so we all played together and went to a school that was mixed. But having said that, I remember in terms of racism, it was interesting because it didn't come at first from white folks in my memory. Going to this elementary school where we had on our block and grew up with and played with Japanese kids and all that, a few blocks down, there was a store and a pharmacy that were owned by Japanese. There was another store a block over across from the elementary school that was owned by Chinese, and a dry cleaner. And I remember we were friendly with the owners of the store, but I took note, even in elementary school, the reaction and the attitude that the woman who owned the store had towards the other Black kids that came into the store. And it was that first really noticing and watching that I'm watching you kind of energy. And following kids around and expecting somebody to steal from you and that kind of thing. And so in that respect, and then some of the teachers, my father was a teacher. And so we knew a lot of other teachers that taught, different levels of school. And it was interesting to me when I was in, I guess, maybe 2nd or 3rd grade, and we had to write a paper. And on my paper, what I had written about Africa, and I wrote Mother Africa, because that's what my father taught me. And my teacher, who was Black, said, "Why did you say that? I've never heard such a thing before." And I was like, "What?" Well, because that's what my father told me, that, Africa is the motherland, that Mother Africa, and is the mother of all land and continents and all. And she said, "Well, I never knew that." And I was thinking to myself, okay, so why am I in your class? But I also noticed in that terms of racism, a lot of my introduction to racism was not just directed at Black people, but it was like the Chinese didn't like the Japanese and vice versa. There were, these some Chinese gangs, Hispanic gangs, Black gangs, Japanese. And I noticed one time we were walking home from school, and one of the girls who was Japanese turned around and smacked this Chinese girl in the face. We were all in elementary school at this point. And I'm horrified. I'm like, "Why are you hitting her?" And she said, "Because I hate them." And I was just like, okay, 2 through. and we kind of broke it up, but I didn't understand where this was coming from and this racism against each other and how the Mexicans were looked down on by the so-called Spanish lighter skin folks who made it very clear that they were not Mexicans, they were Spanish. And I was like, y'all sound
like every level that America can have racism. You saw it from like every angle.
Even
did.
Among Blacks.
Yes. And of course, I grew up in a society in Los Angeles where, you know, in junior high and high school, where you had this whole classism, because a lot of the folks that I grew up with, they're we'll talk about Jack and Jill, this club, at another point, but we're interested to the story. However, you know, I noticed that because a lot of my father and mother's peers were teachers, doctors, attorneys, whatever. And a lot of the kids were light complected and all that. And I was like horrified when I had gone to a party with some friends, and one of the kids whose house it was, came to the door, and people were standing in line to go into the party, and they were putting a brown paper bag next to your face. If you were as dark as that bag or darker, you weren't coming in there.
You weren't coming in.
Oh my goodness.
What?
Yeah. And the whole hair texture and light eyes and the da 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 da. So
what year was that?
Yeah, what year was that?
Well, I don't know.
I remember that. I remember this
approximately
mid-60s, I guess.
No, this was way before the 60s. No,
yeah, it could have been there. But that's what I'm saying.
It was probably late maybe middle to late to around 60, maybe near the 60s.
Yeah.
But it was just like for me, I was just like blown, and I would, of course, run right home to my parents and say, what the hell, you know, not laugh, but, you know, but this is what happened. And I was like totally shocked. And my parents were very international, and a lot of people in our family. And my father was on the picket line as a teacher, you know, and I saw that, and he was a navigator in the Tuskegee Air Force. And, you know, we had a whole different screen, I think, than a lot of people, but I never got over that and was just appalled and shocked that anybody was doing that kind of stuff. And my introduction to Africans from Africa was because my father's first cousin, William Jones, was an ambassador, and I got to meet, of course, I was maybe 12 years old, Sekou Touré, Kwame Nkrumah, all of them were at a party that I was at, and they had on their beautiful robes and all that. And I was just like, oh, awesome. You know, had no idea who they were or what the significance of them was at the time. But it always stood out in my mind that who were these magnificently dressed and men that were at this thing, and their wives. And so, well, anyway, I'll shut up because everybody needs a time to talk. But I just have we have a history in our family.
I love
people.
it, and it's true. Oh,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that different lens really you all have a different lens from where you grew up and who your parents were, and whether or not you lived in places, like the degree of like how mixed an area was of where you lived. It's still staggering to me that I keep saying this was not, to me, maybe it feels like it to you, I don't know, but it doesn't feel like this was that long ago.
No,
it wasn't.
No.
It just
wasn't.
You know, I wonder what was sort of the school experiences. I know one of the things that my mom talked about was, and I'd love to hear about Wapajea, what Wapajea has to say about this first. Did you all have any school experiences where you were called to sort of be like in an integrated system, be like, hey, this is not okay? Did you ever have those experiences in the integrated schools, Wapajea?
Oh, yeah.
No, I lived my whole entire life in segregation. As a matter of fact, I prefer segregation even now. Like if I have something
teach.
I'll do it, but in my everyday life, I don't want to be bothered with them.
Come on.
because culturally I don't have nothing in common with them.
Mm.
You know, if there's something that I need to do to help somebody, I'm going to help everybody.
Yeah.
But on my day-to-day, nope. Because, let me tell you something else about my mother, too. My mother had a way of circumventing racism. And this is what I saw my whole life. My mother was real, real beautiful. And you couldn't really tell where she was from. And so whenever we went downtown in Chicago, because I started singing and, I put a band together at 15 and started singing. So my mother would take me down to Marshall Fields to buy gowns to sing in. And as soon as they came up to her, my mother would speak to them in an accent, whatever kind of random accent, which made them deal with her differently. So
Wow.
I learned that they were very easy to manipulate.
Okay.
Is this a picture of Wapajea?
Oh, that's your mom.
That's your mom? That's
Put it up again.
That's Rabiah's mom. Your mom found a tactic of she was a chameleon. She made them think she was something other than what they were programmed to think she was.
Yeah, because racism was unacceptable to her. You see, oppression has to be participated in. And she decided she wasn't going to participate in it. And she was going to manipulate them and mind Jedi them to make them give her what she wanted.
I spent some time in Washington, D.C., and I thought it was interesting that white people treated Africans differently than they do African Americans.
They do.
Yeah.
They just gave them so much more respect.
Respect, yeah.
I don't know why, but they do. That's why when you said when she spoke with an accent, then that means that she might not be from here, so we can't treat her like we treat the ones from here.
She paid attention to how they treated other foreigners, and she said, "Oh yeah, I want some of that."
Yeah.
Because she was determined to have the life she wanted to have, and she wasn't going to have anybody deciding how her life was going to be.
That's awesome.
And so what I learned as a child is that.
I'm sorry.
Huh?
I was just going to say, that's Malcolm X says, Africans don't get no trouble. Only you the one that's getting the trouble. So all you need to do is tie your head up.
She was determined that she was going to have the best of everything possible for herself. And whoever had it, she was going to manipulate them to get it from them for her children. So that's what I learned about America. That, the Saxons are easy to manipulate. And when you come in contact with them, you kind of feel, you can read what they are thinking, and then you just steer them in another direction. I mean, I lived my whole life without having a job, because when I first went to work, I couldn't stand their behavior. And I decided I don't have time for that. I can't come here every day and be bothered with that. So I decided to manifest other ways to make money so I don't have to come in contact with them. For 50 years, I have not come in contact with them unless I feel like it. Because they are not user-friendly, in my opinion.
Hey, that's powerful. You're telling the truth. You helping me to make my retirement decision. Come on and teach.
Huh?
He's trying to retire. He wants to know, how can he retire? I'll hook you two up. Wapajea will teach you.
I need to learn.
And another way you were talking about the integration. I was in Catholic school till I was in 10th grade. And I was taught by nuns of the Blessed Sacrament. And the nuns of the Blessed Sacrament were an order of Catholic nuns. Their mission was to teach American Indian and Black children, to establish schools and teach Black and American Indian children who, at the time their order was established, had no schooling, had no education. So that was their purpose. They had preschools, elementary schools, high schools, and universities. So unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize it until I heard my parents talking about it. City Park, which is a public park in New Orleans. The first time I remember going there was a school picnic. Now, I must have been in maybe 6th grade. I don't remember our school going on a picnic before, but that year our school went on a picnic to City Park. And it was beautiful. And I'm going, this thing is in the center of New Orleans. This is a free park that we can go to. So this was a little earlier in the 60s, I guess. Schools were Ruby Bridges integrated Friends schools, and those other 2-3 little girls at another school in 1960. Okay. But in the Catholic schools started desegregating in 62. But it was almost 10 years later, you know, at least 8 or 9 years before the public schools really, they had to redistrict the schools, in other words, for them to really desegregate. But in, I would say 63, 64, going to that school picnic, didn't realize we were integrating City Park. The nuns brought the whole school of kids there, and some nuns from another school brought a whole, and these were Black Catholic schools, like I said, run by Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. So we went on, we had our fun. Oh, look, there's this place we can go buy ice cream. Oh, look, there's this like fake temple with the ponds and everything and flowers. Oh, look, there's a storyland, which was fairy tale characters you could climb on and everything. Never knew that was even in this city. So coming home in the afternoon, my parents are all excited and wanted to hear about my day. Well, yeah, they wanted to hear about my day every day, but this was like, you know, like I was getting ready to give them an important newscast or something, and I couldn't understand why. And when they told me what the importance of that was, you know, I just went, oh, so this is, you know, this is a big deal. And I think that must have been the first time I really became aware of what integration was. And as I got a little older, I think before I graduated that school at 8th grade, they took us to a state park on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain. And there was a swimming pool there. Well, we weren't allowed to use their swimming pools, as you know. New Orleans Audubon Park, they closed down an Olympic-sized swimming pool so they wouldn't have to integrate it. But they took us to Fontainebleau Park. And so the only Black kids that ever been there was kids in Catholic schools run by Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. The
Whoa,
nuns
that must have made them popular.
Hey, they were not going to tell a bunch of nuns, you're not bringing these kids in here. New Orleans was like a largely Catholic, I don't know about now, but it's always been a fairly largely Catholic city, at least 50% of the population. And you weren't telling those nuns they weren't bringing those Black kids in there. And so that's how I got involved in protests and integration. We were just, they kind of just kept away from us, and the white people kind of just cut me and gave us looks, but there was nothing they could do because the
because you were going with
segregation started in 1960, and here it was like 63, 64, somewhere around that, and hey, not enough was being done, so they just, okay, we're just going to start it ourselves.
See, that's something that I think is necessary for movement, right? There has to be some sort of revolution. There has to be even if it's not like, you know, sometimes it's burning down a building, sometimes it's marching into a place that you're not supposed to be, going into a place that you're not supposed to be, you know, by law supposed to be.
One way to get a swimming pool all to yourself.
My mother and a lot of other parents were determined that we weren't going to go to the school that was designated for our neighborhood, because my mother had gone to that school, and for years it deteriorated because the more Black and Indian people that moved into the neighborhood, the less the department, you know, in the city did to that school. And, you know, they had mice and rats and all kinds of things going on in that school. And so my mother, along with several other parents, had a protest. And they took it to City Hall. They took it to the Providence School Department. And that was my first introduction to activism. And my mother was kind of the leader of that. And so there were 9 of us who integrated a school across, okay, remember I told you there was North Main Street, and then there was, I didn't mention this, Camp Street. But if you live between Camp and Hope Street, you know, you were kind of in a very interesting position in terms of how things kind of went in that particular neighborhood. So we were between Camp Street and Hope Street. And it was like this whole community said, we're not sending our kids to Doyle Avenue School. So there were 9 of us, and it was about almost 2 miles away. There were no buses, so we had to walk or carpool. You know, some of the parents would drive us to the school. That was the worst experience in my life, because you could tell they didn't really like it. The teachers, the principal, they were not comfortable with us integrating that school. So my whole time, I think from kindergarten to graduation or whatever to go to junior high school was miserable. I mean, you could feel it, you know, they didn't hide it. Now, some of my friends said, I didn't experience that. It's like, I did. I was very sensitive to how they treated us. It was just so obvious. They weren't comfortable. They didn't like it.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, I was thinking how, you know, in terms of that, this is on a kind of the same thing, but a different tip, because where I went to elementary school, there was in the middle of, off to one side of the playground that was not, it was a detached building that was not, you know, part of the main building. And do any of you remember children being called EMR? Or maybe that was a California thing, but it was stood for educatable mentally retarded. And there was a building that was put there on the school ground that was off to the side and detached from the rest of the school building, where these children, all Black, were put in there, where they were taught to sew and things like that, because they were uneducatable, mentally retarded kids. So therefore they had this label and this stigma, and everybody knew who they were coming and going out of this building. And that was another form of racism that, you know, I saw. And then when we were in junior high, my mother, she was a fighter too, this one. And she grew up in South Philly. And I remember when we were in junior high, my sister Sandy, who's 2 years older than I am, came home outraged and said, Mom, my home ec teacher told the girls that she was going to bring soap and water and deodorant to school tomorrow and teach the Black girls how to bathe and how to have better hygiene. And before we could even spin, my mother had her car keys in her hand, and we were all racing for the car because we all wanted to be part of whatever was going down. And we got in that car, and she sped up to that school, which was 8 blocks away, and stormed in there and went to the classroom. And Mrs. Crone, who was this white teacher who was in the classroom, when she saw my mother coming, locked the doors to the classroom, and my mother's banging on the door, open this door. And so here comes the principal and the vice principal, 2 white males, and they're, Mrs. Bowden, now just calm down. Can we talk about this? Come to my office. She said, no, we can't talk about it. Open that door. And they were like, no, you have to come to the office and talk to us about this. And so she said, okay. And they said, because if you can't calm down, we'll call the police. And she will call the police then. And so they finally talked her into going to the office. They got Miss Crone, these 2 white men, one on either side of her. And my mother was only 5 feet tall. And so she was just like lighting them up one side and down the other. And another friend of ours, his mother finally showed up, and she's like, damn, Peggy beat me there again. But it was just hysterical, because she laid them up one side and down the other. And she said to them, I will be back tomorrow morning. And when I come in that classroom, she will get in front of those children, and she will apologize to each one of those girls to their face. and I better never hear about anything like that happening again. And so she was like, well, I was just trying to, and my mother looked at her and she said, so let me get this straight. You only wear deodorant once a week, have to put it on once a week. I guess you only bathe once a week too. Is that correct? And she said, well, no. And she said, well, it's just, we're different. And she said, no, you're not different. So she came up there and she stood there in the classroom with her arms folded and made that woman go to each one of those Black girls and look in their face and apologize to them for what she had said. And so that was another part of my upbringing, that my mother taught us to not hold our tongue. If we saw something going down, that we were supposed to fight and speak out. Yay, Mom.
Now, was something like that possible everywhere in the places that all of you grew up? Because when I'm hearing this story and I'm hearing about the police brutality, like the police brutality that we have now in 2020, would have been possible at any of the schools that you went to?
I want to say something.
My mother was the president of the PTA at 3 different schools at one time.
But see, you lived in the Black Mecca, didn't you?
Huh?
But you lived in the Black Mecca.
The what?
Black Mecca.
Black Mecca.
You lived in an all Black area.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Well,
my
I just
mother was
wanted to say and add that our state and my city was able to extend racism after integration in my city. And the way they did it was they set up the school that was our elementary school. When we left there, they reset that school up as a school that would take in students who had so-called behavior problems. But most of those students were Black male students. And I was one of those students, and they called it the ILC, Individualized Learning Center. So they set up this school and they would get us expelled from the integrated school and send us back to this one school. And it was like 99% Black males in the school. And so that was a way that they continued racism even after integration. Because we may have had some issues, but those issues could have been dealt with in the integrated school.
But they wanted to keep you away from their girls. They wanted to keep you away from their girls.
Come on then.
That's it.
What was kind of interesting about Memphis, like I said, I got bused, and we sent a bunch of kids to the white school. But from what I understood, there was like only a handful, if that many, white students that got bused to the Black school. I think a lot of them opted out and went to private schools, or their parents worked out something else, so they didn't have to come. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And
it was nothing wrong with any of those boys cognitively. A lot of those boys became very successful, graduated from colleges and became professionals. But they, like Mom said, they wanted to keep us away from the white girls.
You ever heard of Les Brown, the motivational speaker?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was labeled educable, mentally retarded.
That's right.
Wasn't he married to Gladys Knight?
Les? I don't know.
I think so.
I don't know about that.
We'll get on that midnight train to Georgia.
I have a feeling that some of the evolution that they're talking about right now in the education system, where I have a feeling that the sort of one of the ways that we experience this now in the education system is not being able to look at Black children and recognizing when they're experiencing anxiety or fear. A lot of times they're talking about how you could have a white child and a Black child, and the white child is feeling anxiety and they're like, okay, this child needs extra care. They're having a hard day. Whereas with a Black child, if they're experiencing the same thing, they'll get labeled as aggressive and get demerits, or I guess it's not demerits in the normal school system. It's you know, whatever the equivalent of demerits are, like in trouble, suspension, and all of that.
You know what's going on in
rotate your camera,
Kenosha, right?
You turn sideways.
Yeah, Wapajea, you're sideways.
You're sideways.
There you go.
Okay.
Or those kids also were labeled as lazy.
Or lazy.
Yeah.
Hold on, I can't hear you.
I was labeled as lazy all the time, and you know, as a child, I you know, I think I was born to be an artist because that's all I ever really wanted to do, and because I felt I didn't feel comfortable in the school. I think I was telling you earlier, you know, the one that we integrated. I think I suffered inside something, which you know, caused the teachers to label me lazy and, you know, not cooperative. That wasn't really it. I just felt like I had no connection to this teacher or to the whole the whole thing. And
Come on and tell the truth and shame the devil.
Huh?
I said, come on and tell the truth and shame the devil.
Yeah. And so and it frustrated my mother because she knew that I was a very curious child, and you know, I loved learning and stuff, and something just didn't click for me there. And so I was very quiet and not always cooperative. So one thing that stood out, and as a storyteller, I talk about this because, you know, my family, you know, we were Native and African. And my mother, you know, was Wampanoag, Chappaquiddick Wampanoag. So I got to spend time with those relatives in the summertime. And then we'd go to different communities, the Narragansett, who were in southern Rhode Island, and then, you know, go over down to the Cape or over to the Martha's Vineyard. So after doing all that this particular summer, I was in the 5th grade, and teacher says, you know, what did you do this summer? I wrote about it. I stood up, and something I didn't like doing, standing up and actually reading, you know, or doing anything where I had to, you know, attention had to come to me. So I was really happy because it was a great summer. When I sat down, you know, fellow students, they were like, wow, man, wow, that was great. Teacher came over to me and put her hand on my shoulder firmly, squeezing it and saying, it's not nice to make up stories like that. You know, all the New England Indians are dead. In other words, she told me, basically called me liar. In front of everybody. Of course, everybody reacted like I had just made everything up. And so when I went home, my mother admonished me, and this stuck with me my whole life. She said, never let anybody tell you who you are. The next day, just like Rabiah's mother, my mother accompanied me to school, went to the principal's office, and then asked to speak to the teacher, and made it very clear that we are still here. You're looking at a Wampanoag, and we are not dead, basically. I mean, she didn't say it in all those words, but she made it clear that it's not a dead history. And so I was like, yeah, Ma, you know. and so the teacher's kind of how she treated me was a little bit different, but my mother made quite an impact on that. And basically that's what everybody was taught. So if you were Narragansett, Wampanoag, wherever you came from in the New England area, they basically said, you're not an Indian. They're all dead. And so, you know, back was marginalized. We were taught to, you know, just feel inferior. So not only are you Black, but if you're Black and Indian, then you are really in bad
double
shape.
whammy. You got the double whammy.
Try to make you feel like he was a penny with a hole in it.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting? You know, something that's so
a diamond.
Something that I'm finding is happening, and it's happening to everyone, not just Black people, but I think especially special importance in Black communities is people are trying to figure out who they are. Like we've seen this uptick in the generational tests, the blood tests and every DNA test and all of that. There seems to be this deep hunger that is spreading, and it's just so powerful. People just wanting to know who they are, where they came from, like who they belong to.
You know, Anglo-Saxons pretty much, unless they were adopted or orphans, they kind of knew what grandma and grandpa and everybody was, unless their family never gave them any history. But Africans came to the New World as slaves. They were taken away from their families. They didn't know not only what tribe, what country they were from, what tribe. They knew where they were from, Africa, but that's all they knew. They didn't bring a handkerchief or anything with them. They were grabbed in the fields, you know, the warriors, the farmers, they were just grabbed where they were and sent away. And then you have the tradition of storytelling, but families weren't even kept intact. So you might have had children sold off at one place, adults in another, and even husband and wife kept together. So there was no continuity of even an oral telling of history.
Yeah.
So they're hungry to know where we're from. Everybody wants that connection to their history now.
And I'd like to say we actually just had this comment from Beto Torrance, who's down there in Puerto Rico. And one thing I've noticed that's in talking with him and some of the family members down there is that what's different about sort of the Caribbean and here is that I've noticed and here the United States is that we were, as far as I understand, we weren't allowed to keep passing down the stories and the cultural stories. Whereas Beto, my mom says hello in the private chat. You can't see it, but my mom says hello. She's heard all about it.
I can't make a comment in the other one for some reason.
You have to like be watching on Facebook. But what's so interesting is like in the Caribbean and in Latin America, I'm noticing that the steeping in culture, the open spirituality that we did not have here. Beto, everybody is saying hi in the comments. They just can't. But everybody is saying hi to you. And Beto also says, hold on, much love to Mama. I do though want, because I'm looking at the time, there's some other things I really want to talk about from the era of that you boomers have braved and become and have proven your resilience in. And that is, what was it like? Where were you? What was going on when MLK died? I also want to remind our viewers that this was not that long ago.
So I was about 9 years old, and he actually died in my city, Memphis, Tennessee. And I guess the thing that was most memorable to me about that whole situation, where after the initial shock, was the tanks rolling down our streets to keep the peace and to keep us from rioting. So you might have heard about rioting in other cities. It's amazing how quick they rallied to keep protests down in Memphis.
Wow.
But that was, I never will forget that.
Yeah, I was about 9 years old, but I don't really recall it. I think I was a little too young to really connect to what was happening in the civil rights movement. And I don't really remember when King was assassinated. I know now, but I didn't remember that.
Hold on just 1 second. Can everybody mute except for Robert? Because there's some sort of feedback. And then when you want to speak, just unmute yourself. Go ahead, Robert. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just saying that I was about Reggie's age. I was about 9 years old. I was just getting ready to be bused into the integrated school in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But I think because I was so young, I don't really recall knowing that King was assassinated or even knowing that much about King. And then I'm surprised now. I can't even remember any of my people showing any expressions of sadness or anything. I'm sure they were, but I just don't recall it.
Well, my mother was very involved in the civil rights movement. You know, when I was growing up, there didn't seem to be any distinction between Choctaw and Black people, because everybody in my neighborhood came from Mississippi, and we were all Choctaw, but there wasn't any conversation about whether or not we were Choctaw or Black. Everybody called themselves colored. And so my mother was extremely involved in, marching, which I disagreed with. I'm not letting anybody put water and dogs on me to sit near you. I
Come
thought this was
on.
ridiculous.
Come on.
But there was a lot of sadness in my community. I was a teenager when he was murdered. There was a lot of sadness, and we all went to the same church.
Mm-hmm.
And I came from a family that we went to church 3 times a week, and we were just praying and just, they were praying for America. They felt like him dying was almost like the biggest thing possible. They had hope that things would become better in America. And when he died, they just seemed so brokenhearted over it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was really a tragedy to them, to the adults in my community. They wept and mourned over that.
I'm curious. I want to jump in on that. I'm curious about Wapajea, how they expressed themselves when Malcolm was killed, which was
You didn't think anything about that?
About 4 years prior.
They didn't even know who he was.
You kidding? You lying to me?
I'm not.
I know you're not lying to me.
No, there was nothing said about Malcolm.
Oh my goodness.
When I was a child and a teenager, no one said anything about Muslims. I mean, I was raised in a very, very, very southern, Holy Ghost, speaking in tongues, church.
Hallelujah.
And so they didn't think anything about Muslims. They were all Christian, Southern Baptist. And I became a Muslim when I was 23. And my whole family everybody in my family stopped speaking to me.
Yeah, that's really something, because, Malcolm said, we're not brutalized because we're Baptists. We're not brutalized because we're Methodists. We're brutalized because we're Black people in America.
It's true. But the people that were in my neighborhood, in the hood, they never say anything about Malcolm. I converted to Islam, and then I converted my mother to Islam. But that was a shock to my whole family. They couldn't hardly tolerate that. So yeah, there was no conversation about Islam, period, in my neighborhood.
Not at that time, unless you were in an area where, there were a lot of Islamic people and you were exposed to them. Well, when I actually don't remember being that aware of what happened when Malcolm X died. I was interested myself and went and read about it years later. All I can remember is the question of my mother and father going, well, was he Muslim? Seems like he was going against them. But at that time, I was young enough that I didn't know what it was, didn't bother to ask because I had other things on my mind. The year Martin Luther King died was 68. I was, I guess, in 10th grade, maybe. It was my last year in Catholic school. And at that point, I was still going to historically Black Catholic school, taught by the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. And I became aware of civil rights and stuff basically through the nuns and stuff. I remember having an assembly at school. They did a mass. They talked about what he did. We didn't get much Black history, but I think I got more than I would have gotten in a public school. They talked about the works he did. And it was only kind of around that time that I became aware that there were certain kids that I went to school with that were even in my class whose parents were very active in the civil rights movement. I didn't know how this happened. I thought all of this integration stuff and all that was done by the politicians and all that was done on a government level. And I knew there were people out there who were activists, but I didn't realize that I was sitting in class with some of the children of these people who were out there doing all the work for us. The next year in 11th grade, I went to an integrated school and I found out a whole lot more and joined protests and all of that. But in New Orleans, the schools were integrated in such a way that they redistrict everything. And so even though I was in who was it, Rabiah? Or no, Penny, who said she was in an interesting area, sort of an overlapped area. They redistrict the schools and we moved to an area that sort of was an overlap area where there was a Black high school. And then there was integrated high school, and I was coming out of a private parochial school. And when we went down to the school board, they had determined that I would go to this Black neighborhood school, which was actually a little bit closer to my house. It was only one was 6 blocks away, one was 8 blocks away. And they were determined I should go there. And my mother was determined that the other school was there. So she went and found a map and found out that I was in the district of the white school, even though it's another story about that school. But yeah, she goes, no, the schools have been redistricted. This is the district we live in. I made sure of what district I was living in before we bought this house. This is the school. So she went down like, hey, don't mess with mamas. She went down and argued with the school board about what school I was going to go to because they had assigned me to a different school. So, that having just had Martin Luther die not too long ago, in my opinion or in my world, and I don't know if it was that, or if that I was becoming more grown up and more aware of what was going on in my world. But that's when I started really, I would say, becoming an active part or active in civil rights. Because once I went to the integrated school, there was a lot of opportunity to protest and do a lot of other things. And to this day, I question, was it just that time period, or it just appeared to me that after Martin Luther King was assassinated, that things sort of blew up in the sense that people were more intent on making sure integration happened. And it was around that time we moved into a neighborhood that there was a great white flight into the suburbs because they stopped the, what is it called, the redlining or whatever. Oh. Black people were able to move into neighborhoods that had been previously all white.
So I just want to point out these two terms, which are like, I guess they're calling them socioeconomic terms. A great white flight is when white people and when Anglo-Saxons and their resources move in great mass numbers, literally white flight out of neighborhoods, and often it kind of screws up the structures and resource structures of the neighborhoods. And redlining, now somebody might know how to explain this better, but redlining, because I just learned about this year, so I'm still learning. Redlining is when the government, like a local or whatever the governing district, whoever's making the districts will redline neighborhoods. Well, they'll make it very difficult, almost impossible for Black families to economically move into neighborhoods that have better resources for their kids, for their just like their daily living resources, and that affects like the education their kids get and
everything, right.
Services, everything. So,
yeah, it's basically denying certain groups services, say like by the federal government. You live in a certain neighborhood, so you're too poor to get a loan. You're not trustworthy. I can't give you this loan to start a business or to buy a car or to buy a house, or I can't show you this house. I know, I'm not going to show this family this house. They're making decisions either directly or indirectly. Just like going to well, you can buy a car on the internet now. But a few years ago, a white man got the cheapest price for a car. A Black woman paid the most for that exact same car.
I mean, someone could make an argument that this is
every aspect of life.
This is a genocide.
Yeah, it was. Every step in civil rights that was taken to advance people of color. There was another, and people talk about there's no systemic racism. There's an official law, movement, or practice that restricted that law or crippled it to the point where it was almost impossible for there to be like any generational wealth or improvement in communities of color.
Yeah, there was an area in Memphis called Whitehaven, and it's actually where Graceland is. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly what Graceland is, where Elvis Presley.
No pun intended.
And when we were, growing up at Christmas time, we'd go back because he decorated really nice. And in the 70s, they let a couple of black people move into their neighborhood, into their area. And over the next couple of years, I mean, you go there now, it is completely black. Graceland is still there, but the whole area around it is completely black. A lot of the malls that were there and shopping centers kind of deteriorated, just because, it took all the big box stores out of there and moved them out east. But that was my first dealing with white flight. And then now I understand the whites are moving back into downtown, which they abandoned back in the 60s.
Yeah.
Like I said, now they're coming back in there and buying up all that prime real estate down there and forcing people out.
That's because black people have moved into the suburbs.
Right.
So it's still another flight.
Yeah.
Another
I
flight.
have a question for you. We have about 15 minutes left. I want to talk to all of you about your hair.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a time right now.
What hair are you talking about, Alexandra? I don't get
This hair, your hair.
you see hair? I don't see this.
Well, then, okay, I want to talk to some of you.
I'm just playing. I had hair back then, though.
Because I see that maybe a couple of us have natural hair, maybe a couple of us have a relaxer. I can't see totally. We're natural hair. We're in a time where we're still passing legislation so that people can wear the natural hair. I know my mom has gone to my brother's school in this century about explaining to a school that his afro is actually the hair that grows out of his head and it is natural hair and he should be able to wear it without getting in trouble at school. And so I wonder, what has your journey of hair been back in those times? Were any of you trying to wear your hair natural? Well, my mom and I have had conversations when I started playing with wearing natural hair. Even my mom was like talking about the possibility of it being hard for me to get a job with natural hair. So I'm getting some feedback. So if everybody would mute until you're ready to talk, tell me about what it was like with hair back then.
Well, for me, the afro was popular at that time. Everybody was wearing afros. Everybody saw the Black Panthers with their afros, and
in the 50s and 60s.
Well, in the late 60s.
So before then, before then,
I was wearing my hair natural ever since I was born, in my black neighborhood and everything. There was some time, even when we wore the afros, they had the hot comb, the straightening comb. They had the ultra sheen, you kind of straighten it a little bit and puff it out. But it was pretty, I would say from the 60s all the way through the 70s, Black people were, proud to wear their natural hair. But they did, use the lye-based cherry curl things later on, and they did do the straightening combs. But it wasn't as the same as it was even prior to that. Malcolm X talked about the conch and all that.
Well,
the pride is coming in other words.
The hair thing was always interesting in my community because I didn't get hair like my mother. And a lot of times, this whole Indian thing was very prevalent, because of, like I said, the different people that came from different Native communities. So if you had hair like mine, which was wild, and my mother always had an issue with how to deal with it because it was so wild and tangly all the time. I guess at an early age, maybe like 7, I started going to a hairdresser to get it pressed so it'd be easier to deal with. And I always had this thing, like, I didn't like that. Why can't I just wear the 2 puff balls and just keep going, or have my mother really just struggle trying to make 2 braids, which would get, kind of to here. And I mean, as a little kid, I had longer hair, but as I got older, it changes, Oh, it was a struggle. So as soon as I could, with being an activist and all of that stuff, Afro. I had to have an Afro. I did not want to put chemicals in my hair anymore or anything like that. And then I went through a period where I did, but locks, I'm so grateful for locks because it's me. It's who I am. But with a lot of my Native relatives, they used to look at me like, well, you moved to DC, now look at your hair. That's that thick New England accent. What did you do to your hair? This is my hair and this is how it is. So it was always an issue with this Indian hair. You don't have Indian hair, you got something else going on there. It's like, well, I'm very proud of this other thing that I have going on. This is who I am. So I've kind of been a rebel within my Native community that I'm very involved in, on the tribal council and all that. So I'm the oddity.
I love your hair. I love your hair.
It's like, this is who I am. Y'all deal with it or don't look at me. I don't know what else.
I love it, Penny, too. I love it.
I thought it was. Oh, I'm
When
sorry.
I was,
I
No,
thought
go
it was
ahead.
interesting because growing up, it was always straightened hair. You before the relaxers came out, you had that straightening comb, and you had to have those ends to where they were pressed, fried, dyed, laid to the side. As a little girl, my cousins had long braids. I didn't, but you still had to have it tamed. You didn't wear like Afro puffs. I didn't have dozens and dozens and dozens of cousins, but everybody had that tamed. It had to be braided and not 10, 15 braids. You wore 2 or 3 or 4. As teenagers, we wore ponytail, but then all of a sudden, everybody wants an Afro. And it was interesting because we were talking about neighborhoods earlier, and we had these groups of light-skinned Black people that now they mostly lived in one neighborhood in New Orleans. And I remember some cousins moved in. I had some cousins moved in that neighborhood, and there were 4 kids, and 2 of them were very fair, and 2 of them were middle to dark. And they were kind of like, they're in the wrong neighborhood, besides which they don't have straight hair. And, it just seems like around the mid 60s to late 60s, all of a sudden, even these kids, Black kids with straight blonde hair, are wearing Afros. Everybody wanted an Afro. Those that would tease other kids for not having straight hair or fair skin was wearing Afros, and they were the most militant of. I never got over that. I go, she's got blonde hair, green eyes, and she's trying to wear an Afro. But that's just the way it was. That's what made me think it was like around this time that Martin Luther King died, that people started becoming more aware, or maybe because I was going into the teenage years and you were out more than younger kids and you became more active. Tried an Afro a couple of times, but my hair is so thin, it just would down the middle. So I just left it straight and just went on with that and just went with the relaxer. And I've never looked back. I like natural hair. I just don't have enough of it to be natural.
Because my mother's hair is straight, she didn't really know about the whole Black hair business. Even my mother said to me, "Ma, why did you tell me about Black hair?" I'm like, "Girl, please. Your grandmother didn't know anything about it." So I desperately wanted my hair straightened because I grew up in a time where everybody went to the hairdresser.
Yeah.
But because that's not what my mother knows about, I never went to the hairdresser. So I made a deal with my mother that when I turned 16, I could have control of my hair. And cause my mother would just, brush it and grease it, wash it, and that was it. I couldn't really, have hairstyles like my friends. So when I got 16, I cut my hair, I dyed it red and straightened it. I couldn't wait half straightened
Dyed
hair.
red.
And I kept it like that until I was 23. Yeah, until I was 23. And then I stopped straightening it, and my hair has been natural ever since then. Because my hair now, the natural part of my hair has to do with my lifestyle. Like, I don't eat pigs and cows. I don't eat anything with dye or food coloring in it. I don't wear clothing that's made from polyester and acrylic. So my hair is just like an extension of that, because everything else around me, like I was looking for a bedspread. My daughter wanted to buy me a bedspread, and I was looking and looking and looking for cotton pretty bedspread. And I had the worst time finding it, because all these beautiful comforters were made from some crazy unknown fabric. And so my hair is just part of the whole natural lifestyle that I, transitioned into when I was 23. So yeah, my hair has been nappy ever since.
It's also an experience too, because like I grew up in a family of my mom had 4 sisters, 3 of them were hairdressers.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to pay to get my hair done. So that kind of determined, just come sweep my shop for me and I'll do your hair. And that kind of
I remember, there was that documentary that came out, Good Hair, and Chris Rock's documentary. And I remember being Auntie's hair shop, and I remember like, okay, my roots are showing, my curly root. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about, it's like, obvious, our hair is curly and it's kinky, and there's like a wide range of what that looks like. And so a relaxer will straighten it. And I remember Auntie just being like, doing my relaxer and being like, doing that thing with her hand in my hair, because her hands were so strong and my head would be like this as a kid. And and her being like, there, now you have good hair. And
Alexandra, the term is not curly, it's nappy.
Yeah. Even that, like,
nappy curly.
Like, some people, I don't know, nappy. I think of it as kinky. Like, I heard nappy for the first time when I came to the United States, and I was in a group of Black people where there was this argument going on whether nappy was a good word or like a derogatory word.
You didn't know.
It's a good word for us.
Well, but they were all Black, so I think there's some in the Black community that do not like that word. I don't know. I don't know.
It had a negative connotation when I was younger, and almost nobody wore their hair naturally. I mean, guys did, because they would have it cut short, and then it would just brush, and it would it would look nice. You had that much hair.
I've seen my dad sit down for a long time with a brush.
Yeah.
I don't do it anymore. I mean, I only remember that from a kid, but like I would see my dad do this forever with a brush, and I'd be like, and men's brushes sold in 2s.
Yep.
Yeah, we called it training
your hair, right?
Training your hair. You know what I learned?
Trying to put
what I learned is when they take the curls out of the hair, is called liberating your hair. So a hairdresser told me that once, and I was like, "How is that liberated if you're doing the opposite of what it is?"
Or what's natural?
That's connected back to that issue of identity.
Yes,
and it goes into the self-hatred scenario, which we're getting away from.
Yeah,
nappy. Just to inform you, a nappy was considered, if you wore your hair natural, or it's time to get your hair done, it's nappy. Or
my nappy is glorious.
Before afros and stuff became really popular, when they first started showing up.
Yeah,
that girl.
And it also was associated with
connotation.
It was actually associated with poor grooming.
Not just that. It was also associated with those pictures that were derogatory back in the day on these posts of pickaninnies and things with this, these little. I remember growing up and my hair was so nappy that my mother, she would, and she had that straightening comb, and it was so bad. And I'm so tender-headed that it was a scream fest whenever she did my hair. And she would pass me around to the neighbors on either side. Nobody wanted to do it twice in a row. And by the time they got through pulling it back, I looked like I was Japanese or Chinese, because my hair was pulled back so tight, my eyes were slanted. But my
I
grandmother,
remember that.
my father's mother was Shining Blackfoot. She had long, straight hair that went to the floor. My father's hair was straight. His brother's hair, both his brothers had straight hair. My mother had a different texture of hair that was kind of mixed. And it was just interesting as having 4 children. Mine came out nappy. My sister Sandy came out not as nappy as mine. My sister Christine, hers is more straight. My brother's was real curly. And, we had a range of different eye colors. Some have blue, some have green, but it was just an interesting thing for me because talking about Malcolm X, my cousin Muriel Feelings, who wrote several children's books, she was really my introduction to Malcolm because she and Betty Shabazz were close friends. And so she would school me at 16 all about Malcolm and, and all of those things and Black Power movement. And so I went to, when we moved to the San Fernando Valley, I went to an all-white high school almost. And I remember my oldest sister, Sandy, and I, we went and we decided we were going to get afros, and we went and got our hair picked out and everything. And mine was as big as Angela Davis's at that time. And so I was strutting around. So we couldn't wait. We got in her car. We went to my grandmother's house and came through the door. And we were like, look at us. We got afros. And she just kind of looked up at us and didn't say anything. And her younger brother came in and looked at us. And he said, what have you done? And we said, we're wearing afros from now on. Power to the people, right? And he said, no, you're those psychedelics. That's what you are.
So it had
but I wore my, that was like, oh my God. And so we sported our afros and all of that. And, different times, my hair went from wearing an afro, and I don't put any chemicals in my hair. None of my kids do. My youngest daughter, Aisa, has an awesome afro, and everybody that sees her stops her and says, oh, I remember back in the day I had an afro like that. And she is like my little warrior because I've taken her to every protest since she was nursing. And but and then my daughters came along, and my oldest daughter, when she was 12, my mother lived in Germany. She was, she took a job overseas and was living in Germany, and she went to stay with her for a month. And I remember getting this tearful phone call from my daughter crying on the phone. And she's like, Mom, Grandma's trying to straighten my hair. She's trying to, she wants to get a relaxer put in my hair. And I told her, my mother will be really mad if you do.
That's so funny.
She wouldn't let her. And so I found a postcard the other day with some stuff in it that Rabiah had written when she was in Germany, and she sent it. And she said, I want to come home. I'm homesick, and Grandma's keeping me prisoner here.
That's funny.
And I just laughed and I laughed. But my kids, and on another thing, with Martin Luther King, and we're talking about it wasn't that long ago, my grandson just graduated from high school. My granddaughter's a senior. And I remember like a year ago, we live in Northern Virginia, and they have a false sense of security because they're in a very international school where it's a public school, but everybody around there is from some country. And so all of their kids, it's like a mini UN, and they're friends. And I remember them asking me, and they were like, Grandma, were you alive when Martin Luther King was alive? And I was like, what? Of course I was. I said, and I jumped through my stuff. I found my card when we first in LA started the first chapter of the Christian Southern Leadership Conference, and I was out protesting then, and I was like, look, and they were like, you really were? And I said, yeah. And I thought, how our kids live in this unrealistic bubble? How could our history have gotten so far away from them in such a short amount of time, where they live in this false security that everything is okay? But with Black Lives Matter, these kids know everything is not okay. And so I'm so proud of this generation now. They're wearing their hair natural. They're in the street. They're not talking about it. They're doing it. They don't have time to talk anymore. They are like, oh, bless these kids because they
Yes.
are
And
carrying it
I'm
forward.
so glad you brought that up because we have just 10 more minutes. And so I'd like to go around one more time. And first, I want to say, I hope that you all, as you're talking, I would like to continue this discussion. And maybe if I reach out to all of you for another invitation, maybe in a month or so, maybe we could come back and do it again. I'm just going to plant that seed because I feel like I didn't even get to half of what I wanted to ask you because all of this was so very important. And the people listening, there's like 9 or 10 shares from this video alone because these are the things that people, like you said, the story has to be kept alive. That's why so many of our indigenous cultures have this oral history, this passing down, so that people don't forget, right? It wasn't that long ago. It's surprising that we don't know about all of this stuff, right? Surprising that we have to dig to find out these stories and find out, the structures of what our parents were living in, right? So I'm going to plant the seed that I hope you would all come back. And that's saying a lot because doing panels is, I'm not the best at doing panels.
You're doing excellent.
You girls. So this is like the fact that I want to do another panel is like a big deal. But I wonder if we could just go around, we could go around just briefly with each person because we just have a few minutes left here and say, what is your greatest hope for people right now who are in this new revolution, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Movement, whatever we want to call it, building the new world? What is your greatest hope? If we could all say briefly for them.
You're on mute, Robert.
I'd like to start by saying, I want to focus on what Maya Angelou talked about, the hope of the slave. And what I hope that the younger people in the current revolution will not compromise with the liberals on reparations. That's one thing, for the dependence of American slaves. And also with the issue of making the world safe for democracy by electing to governments representatives who are truly connected to the descendants of American slaves.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For me, I want to see all oppressed people come together for real. It looks like these young people are bringing a lot of people together because of the fact that they're out there. You see Native Americans holding up Black Lives Matter signs. They're doing ceremonies at places where African American men and women who have been killed, they're actually doing ceremonies because they realize that it's a struggle and it's very similar. There's not much of a difference. And the saying, stolen people were brought over here to work on stolen land is really glaring. It's loud right now because this history is coming out little by little. People are starting to really see it. So I want to see this unification of Black, brown, and red people coming together because a lot of the things that have happened to each group, it's not anything different. Oppression, genocide, marginalization of people's culture and who they are. We need to just, open up those channels and get the truth out. And these young people are trying to make it happen.
I'm actually going to take a different tack on this, and I'm actually kind of encouraged a lot about what I've seen. I've seen a lot of our white brothers and sisters out on the streets with us. Me and my wife, we go protest here in Portland a couple of times a week, and a lot of the crowds are largely white. And it's actually going to take white people to dismantle a lot of these systems that were built to oppress us. And because, you're seeing people getting killed on camera and they can't deny what's happening when they see it with their very own eyes, that a lot of them are starting to come around and say, yes, this is wrong and we need to change it. And they do need to be involved in the process. That said, my biggest hope is us as a people that we get up and vote, because it really does matter. Yeah, if we don't vote, then nothing's going to get better.
My biggest hope for this generation is that they are protected, that they are supported, that if you don't agree with them, get out their way, that we are holding them up and uplifting them and keeping them held closely to our hearts and our spirit, that we are in ceremony more. It's important that we are in ceremony, that we are doing the things that we know to do, because we have a long lineage of alchemy and magic and being able to call our spirits higher and other spirits, and to find that space and to teach them as well about their ancestors, and them walking with them and supporting them. And that when we see our children and our women especially in harm's way, that we step up and get this straightened out, because this is a huge deal and symptom of what's wrong, is what's going on with the earth and with women, especially. Everybody's suffering, but women are especially being attacked right now, and we need to uplift them, because as they rise, as the mothers, we will all rise with them. So my biggest hope is we remind these kids who we are, and we are a mixed society. There's no getting around that anymore. Like you said, most or all of us have white people in our family, Asians, whatever, Native, Black. We can't separate anymore. We have to go by spirit, not by color. And I think they know this.
Marvin Gaye said it. What's going on?
Huh?
Well, Marvin Gaye said it. What's going on? You said it, Rabiah, and you're repeating Marvin's emphasis. What's going on?
Yeah, I told him that. No.
And
that's what I was saying. You told us that.
Taught him everything he knew. No.
So I am happy in one way that young people are becoming more aware and not just sitting on the side and say, well, what can I do? That they are becoming more aware that there is a movement. My hope is that they realize that this generation can move the world, that they know how many of them are out there, that they know that they are the ones that can be the change they want to see, and they can make the changes they want to see. I want them to not forget. I want them to look into their history, Black, white, brown, yellow. Look into the history of America and the American struggle, and how things are not equal for everybody. They try to say all lives matter. All men are created equal. Liberty and justice for all. If that was true, there wouldn't be a Black Lives Matter movement now. There wouldn't be a need for it. I want everybody to be aware of their history and to keep on, don't give up. Don't give up on, accepting wrongful decisions, on people being killed and people being incarcerated and people not being treated right, being treated as other. And I just want to end with the first verse of Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise.
Yes.
Remember that, remember who you are, and don't give up.
Yes.
that's my mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Blessed are those
I just want
that
to say
hunger
this
and
really
thirst
quickly.
for righteousness, for they shall be filled.
Yeah. There's a saying that most older people in our generation are touting about, that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. No, it's not us. That's so wrong. The ones that are in the street, they're the ones we've been waiting for. We had our time. This is their time. So we need to stop trying to steal their thunder. They are the ones we've been waiting for, and they're fierce and stepping up.
Yeah. Alexandra, what did that
Exactly.
T-shirt said that Dad gave you last Christmas or Christmas before?
Oh, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams.
So that's what they are. That's what this generation is. They're our ancestors, mine, yours, and every generation on back. You are their wildest dreams. So go out there and do your thing.
Yeah.
We support you.
Yeah.
So we'll end with Wapajea. I don't know, Wapajea, if you heard, we're about to end. You're the last one to speak, and we just want to know briefly, what is your hope for this generation right now that's fighting in these revolutions and creating the new world?
My hope is for this generation to end up with a homeland of their own. I'm not a person that's going to keep begging and nagging and pulling at thread.
Tell the truth.
So I actually really want for us to separate from America.
Complete separation.
Complete separation from America. America has been the same toxic, beastly, ungodly creature for 500 years. There's been no change whatsoever.
Talk,
When a
Wapajea. You ain't
person
scared.
behave in a certain way, you got to know that's who they are. It's like having an abusive husband or an abusive wife, and every single day they just nasty and mean and abusive and can't get happy and can't get grateful. That's who they are. I'm under no illusions about the Saxons that came from Europe, what their intention is, what they will do to manifest their ideas, who they are willing to dispose of for their goal. And I'm fed up with them.
Speak, prophetess.
I'm fed up with them. I mean, even in marriage, if I'm married to a man and every single turn we make, he just can't get right, I'm not gonna keep on staying with him.
No.
I'm going to the divorce court and let him see the back of my smoke.
Hallelujah.
My car drives away. That's what I want to do to America. I want America to see the back of my behind.
Hey.
Smoke the back of her smoke.
And so your hope for this generation is to show their behind?
Come on.
What'd you say, Rabiah?
I think your hope for this generation is to show their behind.
Their whole entire natural behind. Kiss where the sun don't shine. I'm done with you.
Hey.
And on that note, I have to thank all of you Black baby boomers. We want to have all of you back. I'm going to plant the seed again right now. I think this conversation should still go. I didn't even get to half of the questions that I wanted to ask. People are engaged with this in a way that fire, laughing and fire. Look, we love you. We love that you've come to grace us with this wisdom. It is medicine for people. It is necessary for these stories to be passed on. I want to point out to my mom specifically that I used a comma correct, an apostrophe correctly in my name. The English language has never made sense to me in writing, but whatever. We have so much love for you here at Africa Week 2020. You brought so much value to what we're creating here. And when it comes down, thank you, Penguin, for joining us.
My granddaughter does puzzles, and she just put this penguin together and brought it to show me.
Oh,
Let's see it.
Dima Mahmood, my co-creatrix in Africa Week 2020, is saying, "We love you." And she was also suggesting that part of our Africa 2020 podcast. A lot of you know Dima. Anyway, so thank you for saying yes. Thank you for giving us your time. As you can see, there's so much more to talk about. We're just so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the vision.
Back to
Good
you.
meeting you guys.
Much
Yeah.
love. One love.
Blessings, everybody.
All right.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all. Bye.
Bye.